Chris Robbins, welcome to the UNcivilized podcast. For those of you who have been following the podcast for some time, I was introduced to Chris by the very, very first podcast interview I ever did, that guest, Adam Cobb. And so it's been I've heard your name a number of times. We've had some conversations in the past, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us. Thank you for joining.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to being here.
Beautiful, brother. Chris, for people who don't know you, I'm going to give you the American question of, can you tell us just a little bit about who you are and what you do in the world, and maybe follow that up with just anything that's inspiring the shit out of you right now?
Let's see where to begin. I'm inspired by the work that I'm doing, which is Beautiful. What draws me even into just being in your presence. By way of how most of us find our way into purpose or passion. I spent a great childhood with an absentee father who I loved dearly and could never get enough love and attention from, and thought it was my purpose to go be like him. So I spent 3 decades in the corporate world trying to be the proverbial success in the corporate world, only to find myself completely flat out failed, having lost a ton of my own money and millions of dollars of other people's money in a deep, dark hole, and not sure what the hell had just happened and why I was so depressed. And I think I woke up one morning and, there were a few things missing that I somehow miraculously was able to identify. One was just sitting around a campfire with fellow humans, I should say, that were willing to have much deeper conversations than what the score of the game was last night was missing. Mm-hmm. And I use the word campfire loosely, but something about being in the wilderness was near and dear to my childhood that had gone long missing from my life. And at the time, I was reaching for things to save myself. I was studying Buddhism, meditation. I had become a certified yoga teacher, not because I wanted to teach yoga, but because I thought maybe there was something inside of those teachings that I could reach for as a handhold. And these things kind of had me maybe recognize that I needed to put together a group of men to go do some of these things. And that was what really was the origin story for this business called Soul Degree, where I'm doing very similar things to yourself and holding space for guys to hit the pause button on their life and maybe dive into the matters of their life that have more meaning and depth, which, like I said, I had kind of lost for myself. And that has been a decade-long journey for me thus far. I still kind of feel like I'm on the front end of it, but I'm super inspired by it and the connections that have formed, which at the root of the matter was probably what had me fucked up. Was I was so disconnected from myself, my life, my wife, my children, my path, if you will. I mean, I know we're all on a path and that term gets abused, but I think I was totally numb to the idea that such a thing even existed.
Can we talk about corporate Chris Robbins? And I want to give, the reason I'm asking this question is I imagine people picking up this podcast and identifying with a number of the stages that you've been through along the way, even where you are now. If we go back to where you were at the peak of your corporate career, was there any kind of indication that was conscious that this isn't what I want to do? Or was it just, I grew up on the East Coast. My dad was an attorney. My parents from very early on were like, this is what you do. You go to high school, you go to college, you get a job. This is just like, this is the path. And most of the people I grew up around, that was the path. And it took my own falling apart to go, wait a minute, oh, there is another path. And I'm curious if you had any recognition or just this misery, this disconnection, this way of living, this way of being was the quote normal, despite having probably there being symptoms or signs along the way internally or deeper buried that it wasn't what you wanted to be doing. Does that question make sense? It was a little long-winded.
No, it does. I mean, I grew up on the East Coast also, youngest of 3 boys. My dad was an advertising executive, think Don Draper, all the way. I mean, in every definition. And like I said earlier, I think I worshiped this guy who I knew very little about. And I went through, I was a commodity trader. I was in the software business. I was I caught the .com boom, always chasing the higher salary, the more stock options, trying to think I was the best salesman out there. And when I was handed my first but last pink slip, I decided it would be a good idea for me to go into the restaurant business because, hey, why not be an entrepreneur in the most difficult industry imaginable?
But I was in a bunch of restaurants. I
was so drawn to the experiential side of the food business, just all of the senses at play. At least I had convinced myself that was the reason why I needed to go do it. I had 3 young kids. We were living in suburban Boston, and we didn't want to go to Applebee's or Olive Garden. And we were like, hey, me and my partner were like, we think we could do a gourmet pizza better than the next guy. And so we got in, started our own thing. We opened 7 restaurants, raised a ton of money.
Wow.
And about 1 year into it, my dad died. He suddenly got esophageal cancer. He had a botched surgery. Took him 18 months. He died, kind of just whittled away. And 7 years went by, and I found myself with way too much alcohol and a bag of weed in me, sitting in my car, about to drive home. It's probably like 1 a.m. And for whatever reason, it dawned on me that I really hadn't grieved the loss of this guy that I claimed to be so important to me. And the next chapter of that was really me realizing that I had made all of these choices as a career man, not to try to even be successful or make money, but to try to actually garner his attention, because he was just sort of physically and emotionally absent for the better part of my life.
Yeah.
And man, when I kind of woke up to that and I was in the middle of this spiraling restaurant business, the wheels really came off, and I sort of recognized that all of the choices I had been making were
Mm.
nowhere near deeply personal or meaningful or that mattered. They were all on the outside trying to put forth the image that I had my shit together. And that couldn't have been the farthest from the truth.
Thanks for sharing that, man. I would love to know if you recall, Chris, what was happening around the time that the realization really hit. Were you working with someone? Is this just conversations with your wife? Is it aha moments with a journal? Is it sitting in the car half drunk with a bag of weed? Like, what was, I want to identify this so that someone listening goes, I think I've had that, or I think I'm there too. Do you have a recollection of what was happening?
Well, the way it played out was another maybe year or so went by, and the business that I was in was with a partner, still a near and dear, wonderful friend of mine, shockingly, despite the shit show that went down. But his father was still alive and heavily invested in our business. And I realized that my mental health was out of control and that it might be a better choice for me to just forfeit everything and resign and give him back full ownership, full control, so that essentially he and his dad could maybe make sound decisions without my involvement.
I just want to
And
jump in real quick, if you don't mind. Pardon,
yeah,
pardon the interruption. Again, corporate East Coast guy, how do you know your mental health isn't good? Like most men, especially in the corporate world, don't even know what the word mental health means. Would you mind just giving us a little bit of tangibility? And I'm not trying to vulnerability porn you here. I just want to know, again, for the guy in your station, going, oh shit, I have that same set of feelings or ideas.
I was so ashamed of where I was, so riddled with guilt that I didn't want to go home. I didn't have an aspiration to go seek out the comfort of my wife.
Yeah.
Or my children.
Yeah.
Who looked up to me like I was a hero.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Yeah.
That was really hard.
Yeah. I believe you.
And at the time, I don't even think I necessarily attributed that to poor mental health. Probably because I just continued to mask it with more, with another, another whatever I could ingest to mask the pain.
But that's the toolkit. That's almost like the East Coast educated corporate toolkit. Hey, you're having problems? Here, have another beer.
Yeah.
Right. I don't look down on that. I mean, I was in the same idea, so I very much empathize with you. Especially, how many years ago was this? 20 years ago? 30 years ago?
Yeah. This was probably 15.
Okay.
And I was also in this community that, a very kind of bucolic, white bread, sort of suburban community that on the surface was supportive, and I had lots of friends in it, but there were also lots of people that were invested in the business. And so the more and more it kind of spiraled, the more isolated and alone I felt, and was unwilling to go out and do any sort of sharing about my own plight. And I think that once I got out of the business, it took me a little bit to regroup. And the thing that really broke me out of it if that's the nature of your question a little bit, or sort of broke the freeze over, was Mel's career was starting to take off. She and I were entrepreneurs for a decade, kind of juggling the kids and the house and the whole deal. Neither of us getting very far, but things started to get a little traction. And so we made a decision, which had been something we had never discussed before, that I would completely absolve myself of being the guy to make a buck. And she would assume 100% responsibility for the money and zero responsibility for everything else.
Okay.
And a couple things happened. One, I struggled with, the cultural misperception that I was a weak piece of shit, receiving kids off the bus at 3:00 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, and that was a sign of a true failed corporate executive. Also, of course, it hadn't been modeled for me as a little kid, so I kind of felt out of sorts in that regard. But it also makes me emotional because that was the gift. Suddenly I had to wade into these waters of providing my 3 young children with not money, but presence of mind and emotion and listening. And as hard as that was awesome, because it changed my perspective about what a guy could be inside of a family nucleus. Because the only perspective I had was put the fucking suit on and go make a ton of money.
Yeah. It is the direct opposite of what you opened the call by saying about your relationship with your father. You got to be you had to be almost, I mean, obviously by choice, there was choice in there, but the exact opposite. Yeah.
Yeah. It didn't feel like choice. It felt like obligation because, I had just lost, millions of dollars, and Mel and I were up against it majorly. And so, she went off to write a book that essentially told the story of how, at least the way I heard the book was, this is how my husband fucked us over, and this is how I managed to bail us out. So for a few years there, I struggled with that story also, because that became a very public thing. And so, no, at the time I didn't feel choice. But looking back, I am blessed with that. And not only, I think a lot of people say, oh, I'm going to do it different than my parents did it.
Yeah.
I don't like how they did it, so I'm going to do it the other way. That wasn't at all how, like, my upbringing, like, my parents were cool. They were fine. They were kind. They were supportive. They may not have been there in the way that I wanted. But that was my own story. That had nothing to do with the level to which they did try to probably pour themselves into us. But I really didn't understand them and didn't understand my dad until I had to put on this completely new hat of providing something to my own kids that he didn't do at all, not because he might not have wanted to, but because he just like, that was that generation. He just completely poured himself into his career. Hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah. Chris, what did you draw upon at that time? Like this feels like you're the vision I'm getting, or image I'm getting, like, you're just like a fish out of water. Like, you're not sitting down teaching the kids about uh, derivatives and payouts or the restaurant business. Like, it's I feel the image of like the cliche almost rom-com dad, like, okay, you have the kids for the day and they're looking at spreadsheets and graphs because that's literally the only way you know how to connect with them. Where did you go to create that, or to draw upon that, the presence and the gifts that you gave them as a father at that point?
I mean, it took a few years, and I remember a moment, very vivid moment. I had just spent 5 days at a Buddhist monastery in Southern California.
Okay.
At this retreat, and had a lot of sort of spiritual touch points with this story and my dad. And, at this point, he had been long passed away. But it provided a lot of what an experience like that could provide, is just a complete downshift and maybe almost a sense of clarity. And I rolled out of that retreat and I drove up to LA. Sorry.
Take your time, bro. No need to apologize.
At the time, my middle daughter she was a freshman at USC, which was a long way from our East Coast life. And COVID had not quite hit, but it was weeks away, I guess, now that I think about it. And we spent a few days just hanging out. And we were sitting down in Venice Beach, looking out at the ocean together. We were hanging out, smoking a joint together. The the abuse of that had long since passed, but we're hanging out and talking about her college experience. She was in the music program out there, and having her own 20-year-old struggles of sort of comparison, but she talked a lot about who she found herself to be as a student because of who I was as a father. And she was drawing on that from having sat with many of her friends at school who experienced a lot of what I experienced as a young kid, just a complete miss of connection with these role models that are their parents. And it was sort of in that moment that I was like, wow, okay, I did do something right. But also that the way in which I had the opportunity to become a parent and a father was really deeply heartfelt and soulful in my own way, and that it landed for her. And that was really, I think, the thing that opened me up to realizing that there is more to life in fatherhood than bringing home the bacon.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I imagine a lot of men out there nodding, men who both missed having a father, even if they had a father, or men who are fathers and are perhaps in that same struggle of how do I show up the best holistically? Is it that I'm just the absentee bank account, or how much is my presence valued? So I really appreciate you speaking to that so personally. Thank you. Hey, this is Traver. I hope you're loving this episode of the Uncivilized podcast. I certainly did. One of the things I want to let you guys know is that I run this extraordinary group called the Uncivilized Nation. And over the past 5 years, I have seen thousands of men come and transform their lives. So if you are a man interested in going from numb to fully alive, from lost to on purpose, from domesticated to dangerous in the best possible way, please check us out at www.manuncivilized.com/the nation. Again, manuncivilized.com/the nation. All right, let's get back to the episode. Chris, when did the idea of soul degree come around? And I want to, before you answer that, share with you, I don't know if I told you, when I was in the dark this summer, a mantra that came to me early on that I rode all the way through thousands of times a day, created a program around when I came back, had put on the back of t-shirts, was this idea called OSLI, which stands for One Life, Soul Led, All In. And it just, anytime I got in trouble in the dark room or got anxious, I'd be like, one life, soul led, all in. And I've tried to orient my life under that frame since coming out. And so when I hear a man, specifically a powerful man, using the term soul, it grabs me. And so I'd love to know where that emanated from, if that's the right question. And talk to me about the choice of words, because I'm a words dork.
It really emanated from, on the one hand, not exactly knowing what in the hell the soul really was. And at the same time, feeling like something inside me was completely crushed and run over and spattered across the road. And so the short story of the origin of Soul Degree, or as a title, was just this idea that, hey, maybe there is an opportunity in our lifetime to, much like we go and get a degree in this, that, or the other subject matter, that we could get a degree in our own soul. And it's been even just the name alone has continued to bear fruit for me. I mean, the more I try to peel back the layer on this concept of soul and how do we nurture it or heal it or even identify where it sits, the more I'm clear that, it's a bit of a bottomless, but beautiful undertaking to try to learn more of it. I mean, I continue to reach for things in my life that lend themselves to being able to complement the work I do with guys. For example, I'm pursuing my degree, a master's degree in spiritual psychology. Not because I, have some intention there, but just because I'm like you, I'm very curious and I'm open to being a student of this subject. And the pursuit of this degree has been so complimentary in just other areas that I have since glommed onto. When I really realized how much I botched the loss of my father and not grieved his loss, I found myself learning about what it meant to be an end of life death doula, and instantly sort of signed up and learned more about that, and have since kind of become a doula. Not as a guy, like I said, like I'm not hanging a shingle out to be anybody's death doula, as much as I am so clear that that's one of many topics related to the soul.
For sure.
Is just death and dying, and how obstinate at least many of us in the West are about this topic, how little we want to talk about it, even if it's with our own aging parents, which honestly is where I see my role at this stage in the game. Is, for all the guys that I circle up with, it doesn't go unnoticed as to how much or how little freedom they have to try to lean in to this discussion. There's so much to gain and zero to lose in going there.
Yeah. That is a rich, rich topic that we do not talk about. I volunteered in hospice for almost a year, and it was just one of the most insightful experiences.
Yeah.
On global, being my own body, being soul level, that even at the time, 10 years ago, I was very, very uneducated in practices and understandings of the world, just how it felt somatically to say, holy shit, I was just with someone who died. I held someone's hand last night and they're not here again this morning. That was a radical reorientation. Yeah, I agree with you. We'll share some stories another time around that. I don't want to put a spotlight on you, brother, but how do you define the word soul? I know it's ubiquitous. There's religious ways to do it. There's all kinds. How do you personally define the word soul?
I mean, what comes to mind is just love, and how everything seems to circle back with love. It starts with love and ends with love. And when I think about our own souls and the work, quote unquote, that we could do on our own respective souls, it just has everything to do with the actions we're taking that make us feel that love, not just in the way we may exude it to people outside of us, but largely to the way in which we direct it inward, and the choices we make that either have us going to bed at night really able to love on ourselves or not.
Beautiful. Thank you. How does that word land with the men you come into contact with?
Well, I seem to get a smattering of men. I get some guys that come into the room and they don't know much, but they know something, like, I need to be here. There's a reason why I need to be here. And then I get some guys that come into the room and they're just they're at their own transition point or crossroads in their life, and, scrambling a little bit. And, then I think that there's some that are are kind of like, maybe I was, which was numb to it all and reaching for anything. But I think that and I'm certain that you come across this in all of your work, but I think that often where it originates is either a identified or maybe subconscious sense of feeling really lonely or alone. Mm-hmm. And whether they have consciously or unconsciously built the walls up around them or, found themselves wherever they are, sometimes it takes just waking up at, middle age and like, holy fuck, like what the hell just happened in the last 30 years to realize that, it's not how it used to be. And mm-hmm. there's maybe a blurring of the lines between what I think guys are good at, which is chasing some degree of solitude, and just pure loneliness or disconnection. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, whether people come into the fold knowing that or not, is pretty ubiquitous. Like it's pretty universal.
Yeah. Can we come back to your father's passing?
Please.
And the reason I'm tying these two things together, it's not just a jump, is I find that a lot of men experience deep loneliness and isolation when there's something that they haven't grieved, because they're carrying that almost secret weight of that grief as a block to connection with other people. And so I'd love to know some of your process of, you said early on that you realized, holy shit, I haven't grieved. What does a man do the next morning? How did that process start for you? Relatively, I'll just project, like untrained in grief, in grieving. It wasn't culturally given to me that this is what you do. We drink it and try to make more money with it. How did you start that process, Chris?
I started with drinking.
Thank you.
Also, something I learned from my, my late father, who was a high functioning alcoholic. And I think, I want to say I heard it from you, although I don't know, maybe, but somewhere along the lines, I heard that like it takes an average of 8 years for somebody to either begin the process of grieving or move through. I don't know. I think grief is with us forever, honestly, but it took me about 8 years before I even just woke up to the idea that the day after my dad died, I mean, it took him about 18 months to pass away. Mm-hmm. And, we had plenty of, bedside chats and stuff like that. And I felt, quote unquote, complete.
Sure.
But man, the moment he died, I was back to the restaurants, back trying to make the buck, just completely, maybe not smoothing out the loss with work, but certainly using work as the distraction to move on. Mm-hmm. And it, and by move on, it was like, really what I was doing was, masking the pain with drugs and alcohol and work and a whole lot of ignorance. When I started to realize how I had missed out on what could have been a very different 18-month dying process, that's when I was like, wow, there is a lot about this guy that I still don't know, even though we had a fine relationship. It wasn't like he was estranged from me. It's just that he wasn't a very self-expressed guy. And he would come out around 5 o'clock when the cocktail shaker came out. And so that's really where I think I could call it grieving, but I think really what it was me trying to unpack who he was, such that I could start to put the pieces together of who I was.
Oh, wow.
And that is where I think, as I'm sure there's many guys out there that are like, my dad's a dick. He's always going to be a dick, and I don't want to have anything to do with him. Well, that may be true, but there is still a tremendous amount to learn and draw from that. And I don't mean, let me learn about all the idiot things he did so I can do it differently, but let me learn about him so that I can learn about me. And that process for me has not only helped put all the puzzle pieces together for who I have become, but in a beautiful way. Like I feel so deeply connected to my father who died 20 years ago today than I ever have before. I mean, and granted, I've worked hard at it, but I am a firm believer that with or without the heartbeat of your father, that is the origin story of our own heartbeats, and therefore worth a lot of time and attention for one's own soul growth.
If a guy's listening to this, Chris, and hears that and goes, beautiful, I think I want that, I don't know where to begin. Is it exploration of the father's story? Is it therapy? Is it, where would you recommend guys start to lean into this?
I mean, I think family's a big piece, which makes it tough because family is like the third rail for so many of us. And, we're a little reluctant sometimes to go touch it. But, maybe it's not directly to that person, but it's starting on the periphery of family connections as a way to maybe peel back the onion a little bit. I don't see any downside to therapy. I mean, for a guy out there that has not tried it, I would say don't walk, but run. And at least give it a fair handshake. And, I hear people joke about how their therapist is their paid friend. But it's not that far off from the description of who that person could be for you. It doesn't necessarily have to be some, let's unpack it from birth all the way up, as much as it's like, at least I have done, is just try to understand the puzzle of it all. And having a third party, a sounding board, I think certainly one that is being paid to provide professional objectivity can be invaluable, but not just the only thing. I think that for me, I mean, geez, I I was throwing, like I've shared already, I was throwing the kitchen sink at it. Anything I could get my hands on that almost felt new age, if that's the right overarching term to use, felt like a lever worth pulling, because there was going to be something maybe I could glean from that.
Chris, would you define yourself
like these retreats, like, going and doing something as, I think, often as unusual it is for a lot of guys to go put themselves in the company of other strange men to open their heart. And I think, for 99% of the guys out there, they're like, no fucking way.
Right.
I'm going to go golfing instead, which is awesome, I guess, if you're clear about that. But if you're a guy out there like, yeah, but maybe I should check that out, then again, I would say listen to that as best you can. And even the concept of listening to our intuition can feel a little frou-frou. But I mean, critically important to the extent we choose to carve out a minute or 2 or 10 minutes of our day to even contemplate what our gut instincts are telling us.
Yeah. Was it your gut that pulled you towards working with men and coming up with soul degree? Like it, or was it more cognitive of like, hey, I'm going to sit down with a pen and paper, I'm going to sketch this out? Or was it like, I don't know, I just feel pulled in this direction? I'm super curious as a human about people's instincts and about why they make the decisions that they make, especially when it is something that's a bit more alternative, right? I don't think you wanted to get back into the restaurant business, but that's available. Like there was a lot of standard business practices were available, and here you are leaning into something that's just a bit more off the beaten path or off the beaten track. And so I'm curious around the process of that for you.
Interesting. The way it happened for me was not from a longtime guy friend, but Mel and I we were on our way out to visit her parents who live in Michigan. And our oldest daughter was thinking about touring University of Michigan because she was going to apply to colleges. And some guy on Twitter like reached out to Mel and was like, hey, if you're coming through, I work at University of Michigan. I'm happy to give you a little tour around. Anyway, long story short, we meet this guy. I didn't know him from a hole in the wall. We have lunch at like Klingerman's. I learned that he's way into cycling. The week later, I was planning on doing this like Grand Fondo in Vermont or something. And he's like, man, I've always wanted to ride in Vermont. Well, the guy just spontaneously threw his bike in the car, drove out to Vermont. He spent 3-4 days with us. And he was a guy where I felt this sort of unbridled freedom to go deep with. And it was in that experience with what was otherwise a complete stranger to me that I think I realized this is what I want. I want to be in the company of this with other guys. It never even occurred to me that I would want to go do this with men and women. But there was something intimate and raw in that connection that had me open up to there's something to be gleaned from being in the company of other men. I mean, there's no other person out there that knows it better than us men as other men. I mean, right. God love the women out there. They're beautiful and I love them. But we as a male race, I think are woefully under-resourced with our own respective connections to other men and being able to not only draw from one another, but to cheer for one another, to love on one another, to understand one another. Because I think for the most part, we live up inside our head alone and try to force shit, through the hole on our own.
Yeah.
And it often doesn't end well. Case in point.
I was going to say, let's put a pin in it there, but I want to ask you before we do, because there's a lot of guys who are in that corporate mire or in the mire of unconsciousness and don't know what's going on, don't understand why they're uncomfortable, but just feel some kind of deep angst, discomfort, pain, suffering. If you could have a drink with corporate Chris right now, what would you tell him?
Well, I'm usually not one to lead with a directive. So I'd probably have a dozen questions to ask first. But if I was clear that there was something unstable or just unsettling in their lives, I would strongly encourage them to pull on that thread. And if that thread is, I know I'm not where I need to be, then pull on it. If it's, there's something that came across my transom that has intrigued me, but I haven't done anything about it, I would pull on that thread. If there's something that is really weighing on that person, let's say an unspoken secret or truth that is dragging them to the ground, do whatever it takes to muster up the courage to reveal and release that pressure point.
Yeah.
It sucks sometimes just harboring these deep, dark thoughts, secrets, whatever we carry around. But man, I think about it for my dad. Like my dad, like I said, he was basically Don Draper. And after he passed, it came out that we learned through my mom that he was, he had a bout of infidelity, which he told nobody except for my mom. And, they patched it together and it was beautiful. They had a wonderful marriage all the way to the end. But I believe that he died of esophageal cancer because that motherfucker was harboring all sorts of lies and secrets that got locked up in his throat. And that was the source of his demise.
Yeah.
And again, that's me, Monday morning, armchair quarterbacking what went down for him. And yeah, you could say he was a smoker and a drinker, and that sure didn't help. But I think there was a lot about his inability to be self-expressed about his truth that ultimately killed him.
Thank you. I'm really glad I asked you that question. Brother. Before I thank you for how you've shown up and all the ways you've shown up and that you have shown up tonight. Where can we send people to get more of you, to get your work, and to work with you?
Souldegree.com. That is the best place. I am married to somebody who is all over the internet, that I leave that part of the equation up to her. Subsequently, I am horrible on social media. You can find me on Instagram, but I think if you want to learn about some of the work, probably the website is the best way to find it.
Awesome. And we'll have that all linked below in the show notes.
Yeah, thank you,
brother. Thank you for how you showed up. Thank you for your honesty, your vulnerability, and your humanity, Chris. I really appreciate you. These are the kind of conversations I want to have. I know my listeners want to have, and are deeply impactful to everybody who's listening. So thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate you.
Can I just add one thing about your comment about humanity? Yeah. And I say this because you do this great work also, so I know it happens for you. In terms of us men helping save humanity, we need to understand humanity. And I would argue there is no better gift to yourself as a man to put yourself into a program like your own, or like mine, or like any other men's group out there, as a means of understanding more deeply what it means to be human. And so this kind of work, to the extent people are compelled to pursue it, will make a huge difference in our collective consciousness and understanding and ability to go make the difference that we all need.
Yes, sir. I agree. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure.